Hey, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with Bill Nemitz.
Hello.
And we have a guest today, Ben Grant,
Hello.
Former chairman of the Maine Democratic Party. Welcome to world headquarters of Maine Today Media.
Glad to be here.
I think you're our first guest since we've started doing this. Anyway, a week ago, we were having a conversation, and we were talking about the Democratic Party, and what it came up through was a discussion of Hillary Clinton's new book and the reaction to it among people who hadn't read it yet. Either they hated it or were very defensive of it, of her right to write it, and et cetera. And it seemed to be a good predictor of what kind of Democrat you were based on how angry or not angry you were, or who you were angry at. And we tried to talk about the kind of parts of the Democratic Party with a experiment of asking, could you describe the fault lines in the party today without mentioning Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton by name?
And, I think we made it about 30 seconds into it before
nobody could really.
I accept your challenge.
Okay, so Ben, so yeah, I know you've done some work on this, and I'm just sort of interested to hear your thoughts. So, you want to start there? What are the wings of the party? How is it different than it was a few years ago?
Let me start with where I think folks are on the same page and then go from there. I think the Democratic Party today is essentially unified around social and environmental issues. So whether it's civil rights, choice, those issues, I think you will find largely unanimous support for the Democratic position, no matter where you are within the Democratic Party. I think what's happened is that the schism that was created in the 1980s by the Democratic Leadership Council and the Bill Clinton campaign in that era, that schism has never been resolved. And I think that largely operates in the realm of economic policy and treatment of the business community, treatment of corporate America versus how strong should the government be promoting policies that support workers and underserved people. And I think that schism has not been resolved. And I think when you peel back these debates between various politicians, I think that's what you'll find is that schism is still there. And I think that's what Bernie was able to elevate in a way that no Democratic presidential candidate has in quite some time.
Mm-hmm. And you see that on the state level too?
I do. I mean, even just last week, we had a Democratic state rep leave the party and become unenrolled, and he was probably had the most moderate voting record. If you think of moderate in terms of economic policy, he was probably the most what would they call business-friendly Democrat. I think the roots of that are what I just said. The party made a turn a generation ago, but not everybody turned with him, and we're still fighting that out.
So that's Groman from Biddeford?
Yeah, Marty Groman from Biddeford, several terms state rep from Biddeford, unenrolled from the party, and it's going to continue on, try to run for re-election as an unenrolled.
He'll still caucus with the Democrats, or has he made that?
I don't know that he's made that.
He hasn't made that determination.
No, I'm not sure.
No.
So it's 74, 71 plus 5.
Yeah, the couple of the former Democrats, I think, are still caucusing with the Democratic majority, and some of the people there were a handful of independents who were elected that way, and they've been caucusing with a D. So I don't think there's any change in the leadership composition just based on this. But I thought it was interesting based on this conversation I knew I was going to have that he would make that choice given his record.
Mm-hmm. Where of the people the people for whom economics is the primary issue, however, seem to have migrated away. If you look at Trump's base right now and how much of that, rightly or wrongly, is economically based, in the midst of this schism, have the Democrats lost their base?
To some degree, yeah. I mean, but I also think that's where Bernie Sanders comes in. I mean, this isn't a perfectly linear thing. I mean, what Trump did was violate some long-held Republican orthodoxies on trade and support for whatever the business community wanted. And in that very narrow sense, he sounded a lot like a more FDR Roosevelt, a Roosevelt type Democrat, or like Bernie. I don't want to compare the two. I don't think that's a fair comparison. But on that one issue, they were very similar.
Yep, so on trade and also on promising to bring back manufacturing, the kind of things that were sort of traditional Democratic strengths. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, not just that, though. I mean, I think the very role of the government in the economy is really at the heart of it. I mean, you look at the debate in the legislature over the education referendum. I think that was question 2. I've lost track of what question it was. But, raising taxes on the high-income earners to support education. I mean, that was a classic liberal policy. It eked out a win amongst the electorate, which I thought was a very promising sign for someone on the left, that if you remove the politicians from the debate, our priorities could still have some popularity. So I thought that was promising. But then you saw it, kind of retrench a little bit when it got to the legislature, and
reversed. Actually,
well, it reversed in some sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you compare today with 4 years ago, you'd think it was a massive victory for the Democrats. They got Paul LePage to support an extra $100+ million for public education. He never would have done that if you had asked him in December of 2014. How it was funded was clearly changed quite considerably and made more conservative for sure.
But going in, there was this mantra early on that the voters have spoken, the surcharge is not negotiable because it is the will of the people, and until all of a sudden it wasn't. Why wasn't there more of a backlash to that? I mean, there was some, but it seemed as we got into that session, it just became more and more of a foregone conclusion that that this tax surcharge was going to be repealed, and B, it was just a question of where the numbers are going to fall here. And out there in the electorate, the people who had voted for this thing, I was very underwhelmed by the fact that people weren't more offended.
Well, I think that's the answer right there, and I think we'll see it bear out the next time the voters get a chance to speak, which will be next fall. If they do punish legislators by voting them out, if they altered the results of the referendum, I think that will be a very powerful signal for future legislatures facing similar electoral results via citizens initiative, that they won't touch it with as much
because there was a
rigorous
time when you didn't touch that stuff.
I think the proposition that they're going to be punished for it is fairly untested at this point. I mean, I don't think we've had this type of direct support for an initiative and then the legislature immediately essentially turning it around that quickly. So I think the fear that legislator might have right now is somewhat unknown. We just don't know how the voters will react. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to be on the ballot next year. So
yeah,
they have a lot
wouldn't
to
you have to
choose from.
see primary challenges?
Absolutely. That would be a leading indicator. If you see more left-leaning Democrats taking on incumbent Democrats in a primary, for instance. I don't remember there being many Republicans that I thought would be in trouble based on their vote. I think they probably fell in line with their party, but the referendums were initiated by more left-leaning organizations, right? Labor, education, folks like that. So if people are really animated by the reversal votes, if you want to call them that, then I would think they'd express it through a primary. That would be the best way to do it. If we don't see that, then I'd be less concerned that the voters are going to care so much.
You wonder how long the institutional memory is on things like this. The fact that it's happening right now and the election is still a year away, and given the fact that it was a pretty nuanced issue to begin with, how much of that raw emotion is going to carry over into the electoral cycle?
Personally, I don't think very much. I think the electorate, at least the swing part of the electorate, has a short attention span and a short memory. So it'll take a candidate next fall to really remind people of what happened. If neither side, or even if there's a third party candidate, if no one brings it up, I don't think it'll be a factor. I think people will have moved on to other issues.
So Ben, one of the things I was looking for coming out of the last election was some of the energy that Bernie Sanders drummed up here in Maine. With his public appearances and his performance in the caucus, that I was wondering to see if any of that would carry over to the state government. Would they be putting that kind of pressure on the legislature? And it seems like a lot of the Bernie energy is focused on national issues. And I don't know. I think the organization is it Our Revolution is also very sort of nationally focused, federally focused, and certainly. Everybody in this room and everybody that I know has been really focused on the White House for the last 8 months. But have you seen any sign that there's a carryover, or is that energy, is that enthusiasm going to be part of the political landscape here?
I think it will be. I don't know that I've seen it so much yet. I mean, one of the issues is Bernie himself is still, a potential candidate in 4 years. So I think the people who wanted him to be the president are still probably focusing some energy on that because that's still a possibility. He's clearly, in the speeches he's given, even last week, his major foreign policy address, that's the sign of someone who's, a potential candidate. So I think the fact of Bernie himself doing what he's doing probably draws some of the energy away from the state. I think when we get into this primary season, we have a very multi-candidate field for the governor and several candidates for Congress. I think we're going to see there, for the folks working on those campaigns, if the Bernie-type volunteers are coming in to work on those campaigns, and then you'll know that people have sort of transferred their energy into a state-level race.
What do you see as the risks or benefits of this? Let's take the gubernatorial field. It's very crowded. People coming from a lot of different directions. I'm assuming you're going to say this is a positive, but what are the risks?
The risks are how the candidates treat each other. I mean, if there's a kamikaze candidate out there who just doesn't want someone to win, you can do some lasting damage for the general election that you probably can't recover from, whether it's depressing otherwise Democratic voting people or depressing fundraising or what have you. There's certainly some risk of that. But on the whole, I think right now with the party where it is, circling back to the very first question about, what is the party and what does it stand for, I think a primary is a really good way to sort that out and to have those issues aired. I think with such a broad field, you're going to hear from all points on the Democratic spectrum. I think that's probably a healthy thing.
You consider the field broad? I mean, I know there's a lot of people, but do you, how do you describe the landscape?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly people who have come out of the Bernie effort, but there's also people who definitely didn't, who are Clinton supporters. There's some mainstream Democrats. There's some people who have held office for a long time. There's some newcomers. So I think just based on those varied biographies, they're all going to be looking for little pockets of the electorate, right? I mean, you're going to be able to win the primary with probably, 25,000 votes. So you can go fairly narrow with that if you want to. So I think every conceivable cohort that would support a Democrat is going to get tapped into. So, in doing so, the candidates are going to have to speak to a lot of different types of people with issues.
There's a danger in making the Democratic primary about Paul LePage?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I was behind the scenes a fairly central actor in the last campaign against Paul LePage, and I think we over-relied on anti-LePageism. And, I do think you have to point out where the opponent is failing or where you don't think they'd be a good governor. But you have to give people a positive vision and talk about issues that matter to them in a compelling way. And I don't think we did that well enough in 2014. I hope that's the lesson people learn for 2018.
Is there anything you can learn from Paul LePage?
Yeah, certainly. I don't think anyone would want to try to replicate his style or replicate the way he treats people. But he's been fairly dogged about the issues that he cares about. I don't think anyone is surprised that he's trying to reduce welfare costs. He ran on it. He's tried to do it. He talks about it all the time. And I think that kind of discipline on a couple issues is something you can learn from. I mean, I don't think the polling on public policy issues in 2010, before there was a Governor LePage, would have had welfare as such a prominent issue. I mean, he really has taught, in sort of the loosest sense of the word, but he's taught the Maine electorate to care about this. And I think any candidate with enough passion, enough discipline, and with a good enough issue can do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. His 2010 welfare points were much softer than the language he came in after he was elected. It's all about easing the path off. What I notice is that he's got a tremendous ability to get my attention and get everybody's attention in the newspaper, and then he can dominate the media landscape whenever he wants to. It seems like.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sure I'm sure you hate us about it.
Go ahead,
Well,
let us have it.
But it's like you can't look away.
I don't have to tell you the controversy sells, right? So that's part of what it is. I mean, he lays it out there, and the media will grab onto it because it is interesting. Whether it serves the state well or not, I don't know. Whether that model would work for a Democrat, I don't know. I don't know that there's a perfect symmetry there. That just if you had a kind of shoot from the hip, offend people type as a Democrat, I don't know that would work. I mean, we have different voters. So I don't know that you could just be Paul LePage and try to create news out of nowhere. I go back to Bernie, actually. I mean, look at what he did. He ran a campaign that was almost explicitly, in which his biography was almost explicitly absent.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't run a campaign based on personality. He ran
the socialist mayor from Burlington.
Right.
You never heard, yeah,
right. I mean, but he ran a campaign that was legitimately about some big ideas and big issues, and he would repeat that time after time after time, through thick or thin, no matter what was going on. And he coalesced an amazingly energetic, diverse group of supporters. So I think you don't necessarily have to go to that space of being personally weird or interesting or flamboyant or anything like that. I think you can if you pick the right issues. I think you can appeal to people.
Do you think Democrats tend to over-explain things sometimes, and in the process lose the simplicity of the message?
I know that's a common critique. I think it goes back to what issues are you picking. I mean, if you want to thoroughly explain single-payer health care, I think you can do that because that is a big, bold initiative that really inspires people. But if you want to go into the weeds on some level of like tax credit for some industry, I mean, if your policy isn't that good or that doesn't have that broad appeal or doesn't inspire people, then going into the weeds is not going to get you very far. So I don't know that I accept. I think it just depends on what it is you're talking about. So I think what my party needs to look at is what is the next beachhead for state level bold progressive policy, right? So minimum wage increase sort of taken off the table, right? Big tax increase for education taken off the table. So what's next? I wrote something about, I put a thing on Facebook a couple months ago sort of soliciting ideas. What do people out there want to see? And I think there's a lot of momentum behind something like a broad paid family leave policy. I mean, I think that might be the next big thing.
That was interesting. Yeah, you had it kind of separate. You solicited opinions from Bernie supporters at one point, and then later
exactly.
from.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to try to apply Bernieism, if you will, to a state level campaign. I mean, because he campaigns very hard on some things that you just can't do as a state level candidate, obviously, right? Wall Street reform or, liberal internationalism, right? None of those things are going to matter in a governor's race. But then what does, especially when you take minimum wage off the table? Are our candidates going to be campaigning on single payer? I don't know. Time will tell. But what else is there? I think a paid family leave thing is right in the wheelhouse. That's what I'm seeing when I put that stuff out there. That's the feedback I get. That's a big societal change if a government wants to go that route.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, what about the college stuff? Paying for college, free tuition.
Yeah, certainly another big, bold initiative. I don't know that it has the same appeal as a paid family leave kind of thing. I mean, paid family leave would apply to everyone. Everyone's got kids or grandkids, right? I mean, college is a little bit niche because not everyone goes to college, not everyone wants to go to college, not everyone's even close to being college age. So I on the scale of things, I would pick more of a family leave thing myself. But certainly, if you want to inspire young people, something around college affordability would be probably right in the wheelhouse.
Yet already I'm hearing candidates using that same old phrase, economic development, job creation, these kinds of things. Is that something, as critical as it is for Maine, is that a tired message at this point? How do you breathe life into that to get people excited about it?
I think it is pretty tired at this point, only insofar as we haven't had any great answers for it. right? I mean, the Democratic position in economics has been filled in large part by things like minimum wage, things that help employees. But if you're a Democrat who wants to help grow business, start business, I think the issue portfolio has been the cupboard's been a little bare, if you will, about what to do about it. But that's an opportunity. There's certainly a lot of left-leaning people out there who are involved in entrepreneurship and involved with small businesses in Maine. Obviously, you hear all the stats about it. If there's a really big, bold way to address those people's issues or the people who want to get into that kind of thing, I think that could be a good Democratic issue. I don't know that it exists right now. I think I'm hoping the campaigns have people in back rooms writing white papers about that kind of topic, because I certainly think it's politically viable. I mean, there's so many small businesses out there.
Well, there's nothing like a good success story.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, the Democrats have been more than willing to provide tax breaks to businesses that are supposed to create jobs. And
well, this goes back to your question, the premise about, or at least partly about my answer about how we treat economics. I mean, there are limited resources, right? So I don't know how many millions of dollars Maine has in tax credits. Would that be better served doing something like, better health care for everybody or free community college? I mean, there are finite resources. And I think the party is wrestling with, do you do something that directly benefits companies, or do you do something that directly benefits employees and students? It's probably a mix of both. But I think when you look at politicians on the various parts of the Democratic spectrum, you're going to see that division. Do they want the government to support directly the business interests or not?
You look back on Medicaid expansion and you can speculate as to how different economically things might be had that not taken the course that it did. Is there value in clawback right now in terms of, now... What do you mean by that? Well, what I'm saying is that the whole idea, what the LePage administration has successfully done is kind of demonize the whole concept of Medicaid welfare. It's just beat it and beat it and beat it. And as we inevitably head into a new era now in Maine politics, do you think it's going to be possible to revisit that issue without having this kind of reflexive reaction among many people, as you said earlier, who have kind of been conditioned to see that as a direction in which we don't want to go, when in fact it could hold some real economic benefit?
I think Medicaid has been ridden so hard that it's become a symbol of partisanship, if you will.
A badge.
Yeah, it's one of those badges. You're either for or against, and that tells you what side you're on. I don't know that the merits are going to be persuasive. I would expect it would just be its success or fail will be a result of the partisan composition. I think it's an automatic that if a Democrat wins, it's almost certainly going to happen if the ACA still exists, and if a Republican wins, there's no chance it'll ever happen. It's just one of those issues that's been separated pretty cleanly between the parties. My concern in the long run is that it's taken up all the oxygen on healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of other things about healthcare that could be fixed and probably should be fixed. I mean, Medicaid is something that addresses a large but discrete population in Maine. There's all kinds of people who have health insurance. It's not that exactly affordable, and the costs don't seem to be getting
who are really watching that from the sideline.
Right.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I'm a partner at a law firm, and I see the bottom line. I see the increases every year, and I know what it means to have to put more money into the healthcare line. I mean, there's lots of people in Maine who have healthcare who could probably have it be better. I'm hoping that we can have the Medicaid fight, but then the party can move to other issues that we can do in Maine to make it more affordable for everybody.
That was a criticism in 2014 that the focus on the minimum wage and Medicaid didn't address the sort of pocketbook issues of struggling working class, middle class Mainers.
I think that's fair. And again, I don't want to cast blame on anybody else. I was part of that campaign, so I want to be clear that I was signed off on all of that. But I do think we saw the limits of that type of policy. I think it's always going to be part of the Democratic portfolio, but can we add to it things that have even broader appeal? Can we appeal to the middle class people who aren't worried about things like Medicaid and the minimum wage, who make too much money and have employer-based health care? There's a lot of people out there who fit that description who aren't doing so well or want to be doing better. What do we have to say to them?
Right, and you think family leave is is the one? Because that seems, when you're talking about people, say, small contractors, and it sounds like a burden on business.
Well, I don't accept that burden on business is the exact opposite of what we're talking about. I mean, I think there's space in there. I mean, if you are, paid family leave by definition means you have a job, right? Or needing childcare by definition means that you have somewhere else to go. So it's almost by definition sort of not an anti-poverty program. It's something that appeals to
You're
people
engaged.
who are working,
Right.
who are
You have
doing
to
the right
work.
thing. It's just, can you keep your job, right? Or is your kid getting the best upbringing that they can while you're at work? So I think something like that, and I think there's a great case to make to employers as well, that you're going to retain good employees. You don't have to cycle through people, train new people. You get their loyalty, right? I mean, if you're someone who can have a child and know that your job is safe and come back 6 months later or whatever, and you haven't taken on the chin financially, I think you're going to be pretty satisfied with where you are. So,
And grateful to that employer.
absolutely,
Yeah, right,
absolutely.
right, yeah.
Things cost money, but we are the Democrats. We're not afraid to spend it. I just think that if we can reorient some of the ways that we would spend taxpayer money, I think we could do better for society and also do better politically.
Can I shift gears for a second?
Sure, yeah.
Susan Collins, we're all waiting with bated breath. Let's hypothetically assume that she throws her hat into the gubernatorial ring. Is it over?
Yes. Well, let me give you one caveat.
Okay.
If one of the Republican candidates stays in the race and decides to take her on, has some money.
One in particular?
No, it could be any one of
okay.
them. I don't think any of them are too wedded to their beliefs, so I think there's a lot of opportunists over there. So I'm sure they'd say the same about our side. But I think if someone went hard to the right against Collins, I think she's vulnerable.
In a primary?
In a primary. It's got to be well-funded, and it's got to be someone who's willing to take her on by going hard to the right.
But in a general, you think she's unbeatable?
Yes.
Yeah. And what would your advice be to your fellow Democratic gubernatorial candidates should she enter the race? Hang in there and hope for something in May or in June, I mean?
I think you have to stay in there and run hard, and there's a lot more at stake in an election than just one race. I think you've got to stay in one because you could win. I mean, I just said that she's unbeatable, but I don't think that's 100% true. Things can happen. She really hasn't had to take many hard stands on state issues for many, many years. I mean, she's going to have to answer these questions about Medicaid, about taxes, about whatever, take your pick, Sunday hunting, whatever. She's going to have to take some positions that will offend people more than she has in the
Bear
past.
baiting.
Bear baiting. Yeah, right. But I think the Democratic Party needs someone talking about issues in a good, compelling way at the top of the ticket. It'll help down ticket, which will be very important if a Republican looks like they're going to win the legislature. We need to hold one of the houses. So, and there's the you never know factor. So,
yeah, if the past year has taught us anything, it's the you never know factor.
That's for
right.
sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
What would happen if she ran as an independent? Wouldn't that put Democrats in a really difficult position to not want to elect that hard right Republican candidate?
I think time will tell how good Collins would be for Democrats as a governor too. I mean, it's no. I hate to get into this. All I want to do is just not elect a Republican. I mean, we can play that game, and we haven't played it well the last two cycles. But I think there's more out there. I think a good Democratic governor could do a lot more things that people like me would agree with than a Governor Collins. You will, from the outside, it'll look like government's running better. She'll probably appoint better people and it won't embarrass the state. But I don't know, is that really good enough? I have my sights set a little higher. I think the true answer to your question, though, is we'll see where her support comes from. I mean, if let's say, I don't know, let's take Garrett Mason, if he runs and is a Republican nominee and Collins is an independent in the middle. I mean, he's going to grab a lot of the right-wing voters. If we have a good nominee on our side, maybe the base will stay home. Maybe it is competitive.
Triangulation strikes again.
Yeah.
Do you think it's significant that she's saying she wouldn't announce till October?
I think it's only significant really within the Republican field. I mean, it certainly kept them, I would assume it kept them at bay. I mean, I would suspect you'll see a couple other entrants if she announces in the next few days that she's not going to do it. Look, I don't. My mentor, my original boss at in politics and in the law was a guy named Jim Case, and he was Senator Muskie's last chief of staff. He helped handle the transition to Senator Mitchell, and he always said the U.S. Senate is the best job in the world, and no one ever leaves it to come do something like run for governor.
Well, that seems to be the conventional wisdom. Yeah.
And I would say, given her prominence and all the praise she's received over the last 6 months and the good votes she's taken, I have to concede that it's more likely that she would stay and keep doing that. But, I don't know.
I have one last question. As we head into what's going to be, one way or another, a very engaging and maybe bruising political year, take the temperature of the Maine electorate right now. Where do you think, as a whole, I'm not on one side or the other, but just generally speaking, after 8 years of Paul LePage, how would you describe the mood or the temperature of the electorate right now?
I think after 8 years, anywhere, anytime, people are looking for something like the opposite. I don't know that necessarily means issue-wise. I hope it does. I think you'll probably see a winner who's temperamentally probably unlike LePage. You think of the change from Obama to Trump. I mean, those are two very different personalities. I think there's something there to it. I think we'll continue to fight the rural-urban divide insofar as a lot of places like around here are doing quite well overall, but rural Maine is still struggling. I mean, in my day job, I represent a lot of people who do blue-collar work in rural Maine, and I don't think there's been a lot of change for those types of folks over the last, 8 years. So I think you'll probably see a schism there about what people are looking for. So I don't.
Something fresh, though.
Yeah, I definitely think something fresh. I mean, I think something new is always better. I hope there are candidates who are pushing new ideas and we're not refighting the LePage years. I mean, I think that's a real risk for our side, is that we relitigate the last 8 years. But I think if we can give the voter someone who's temperamentally different, but also a little bolder and charts a course forward, that's compelling. I think that's the answer for our side.
Well, thanks, Ben. This is really
It's
interesting.
a pleasure. Anytime. I'm glad to see you guys.
Check back in 6 months.
I will.
This is a Press Herald podcast. You can hear past episodes at pressherald.com/podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Android devices, and stream on Stitcher. Please email comments and questions to letterstotheeditor@pressherald.com. Thank you for listening.